Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. No End to Days. Episode 4. Chapter 16. Crash Smack. Metal cracked against metal. I spun in a direct circle, keeping my eye on my opponent. Always keep your focus, Road had told me. I threw my weight into my left arm, raising my sword into the air, making sure to keep a firm grasp around the handle. I was wielding Road's longsword. With a resounding thud, my sword hit Vikens and stopped. Our blades met, and both of us froze. "You have been practicing," he said. I stepped back and lowered my sword. The year was 1875. Viken and I stood in the weapons room in Hathersage. On the wall were hundreds of swords, daggers, and various kinds of weaponry. There was an apothecary table and a room in the back for invocations and spells, sectioned off by a black curtain. My loose-fitting gown allowed me to maneuver with ease. It was a sea green color, bright when the rest of my world could not be. Viken loved practicing his swordsmanship, positive that one day he would need it. That day he wore a white button-down shirt and a pair of leather pants. "Easier," he said, "to advance with the sword." The weapons room was on the first floor and faced the main drive to the house. It was when I placed my sword back in its sheath that I heard laughter. Viken was already at the window. "Who is it?" I asked as I joined him. "A couple," Viken said. They walked hand in hand. She was a young creature in a bright peacock blue gown. Her companion was dressed in a light brown suit. I raised my eyebrows and took a step back from the windows when the young man looked about him, stopped walking, and gathered the woman into an embrace. He kissed her so hard that when they pulled apart, she gasped. Then he did it again. "Lust," I said. "The downfall of any woman with a mind of her own." I turned and rested my back against the wall. Viken leaned against the window frame and looked at me. He had such deep-set, dark eyes. Even as a vampire they were still warm. "That is not lust, Lena." Kissing her in that manner. To take her breath away. Viken stood in front of me and ran his hands down the length of my arms. I wished I could feel his touch, but it was just wind against a tombstone to me. As of late, Viken's company was the only reason I maintained any semblance of sanity. "Don't you wish sometimes," he asked, his eyes eager, "that you could feel me?" I looked down at the smoothness of Viken's hands and was reminded of a moment in an opera balcony when I had those same desires. When I looked up to Viken's face, I noticed that his mouth was turned down. Perhaps he knew as well as I that I no longer had the capacity to wish. I turned away from him and looked out the window. "I do," he said. "I miss touch. I mean really touching so that all my nerves stand on end." Out the window, the couple had turned to walk off the property. The man stopped, picked a wild flower, and presented it to the woman. "That's human love," he whispered. I scoffed. "Has it been so long that you cannot see it?" Viken asked. A dark shadow passed over my eyes. He was right. It was love, and Road had been gone so long that I could no longer see it. I gritted my teeth so hard, one of my back molars cracked. "Come on," I said, and started for the doorway. Where are you going? Vicken asked, and a smile spread across his face. His fangs lowered. To meet our new friends, I said, and spit out part of the broken tooth so it jumped along the floor. Let's have a bite to eat. I shook my head and refocused on the anatomy table. It was Monday, and I was back in class. I felt the caverns of the broken tooth in the back of my mouth with the tip of my tongue and sighed. I had gotten to class early. I hadn't had much sleep since Justin Enos decided to change everything and kiss me. When I first arrived, the classroom was empty, but during my daydream almost everyone had shown up. A pair of sunglasses slid across the table and bumped my notebook. I looked up to see Tony half smile at me and then take his seat. I didn't see you at breakfast, I said. You forgot those. In the art tower yesterday, he said, pointing at the sunglasses. Oh, I said. Thanks. So that's why he followed me into the greenhouse. Are you ready? He asked, taking out a pen and paper. I did the same but wondered why we weren't getting out our books. For what? I asked. Frog Day. We have to dissect a frog, he said. Is it alive? I asked with interest. There was a jolt of excitement in my chest. Would I have to kill the frog? Would I care? It's like our first test or whatever. Do you even listen in class? Not really, I thought. It's really bad luck to look into its eyes. So don't, Tony explained. What's so bad about it? My dad says killing a frog is like killing a soul. It's just bad. But listen. More important business, Lena. Way more important. Tony turned to face me. I expected this to be it. The moment he would confront me about Justin Enos. Tony's features were all business. I need you to sit for me again today. My teacher wants me to get one more thing right in the portrait. I have, an appointment, I said, thinking of my small promise to myself the night before. After class. What do you have to do? Tony asked. Hang out in the greenhouse. No. I'll tell you later. Secrets, Lena. So many secrets. Tony sighed. Come by Hopper around dinner. Sure, I said. Just when I took out my lab book and pen, I felt a kiss on my cheek. I looked up. Justin towered over me. He looked good, too good. There were crinkles on the sides of his eyes. What up, Sasaki? Justin said with a nod. Tony nodded back once and flipped open his anatomy notebook. I didn't need ESP to tell his mood was icy. I have practice after class, but you're coming to dinner with us tonight, right? I have to ask you something and I don't want to forget, Justin said as Ms. Tate walked into the room. Yeah, I said without a thought. I thought you said you would help with the portrait. Tony said, and I could see a rising shade of red creep up his neck. That's right, I did, I admitted before Justin could say anything. You think we could do it tomorrow? I asked Tony. Whatever, Tony grumbled. Don't forget, Lena, dinner. I have to ask you something. It's about Halloween weekend, Justin said as he made his way up to toward his seat. Why did he always have to look so good? He probably just wants you to watch him play lacrosse, Tony scoffed. The idea of watching Justin run up and down the field, cradling a lacrosse ball, sweating and jumping while I sat by and watched? In my fantasy, Justin was dripping with sweat, glistening from the sun. It seemed like a really great idea. "You're becoming one of them," Tony added just as Ms. Tate started to unpack a cooler. "Who?" I asked. "One of those girls who follows Justin Enos around. An official member of the three-piece. Or is it something even more lame if you join, like, foursome?" "I'm not one of those girls. I wasn't the one bungee jumping with Justin Enos." "You were. Why did you even make me come?" I thought I started to say, but Tony interrupted. "Soon you'll be sitting on the sidelines watching him play sports. You'll be coordinating your outfits, melting your brain. Just wait and see." My mouth dropped from the surprise of the return of two old friends. Pain and shame, they pooled in my stomach. "I really don't," I started to say, but someone slid a metal tray onto the table with a dead frog on its back. Its skin was a bluish-gray from being preserved in ice. It looked frozen. "Concentrate, Lena," Ms. Tate said. "Your test begins now." She turned away to deliver another frog to the table next to ours. I stared down at the tray. I wasn't expecting it to look like that. I wasn't expecting it at all. Its small belly was rounded, and its legs were spread wide. Tony picked up a few pins and pierced the swollen frog's toes to a piece of blue fabric beneath its tiny body. Doing this exposed the belly so we could cut it open. I gasped, and my body jerked in an odd kind of hiccup. How odd, I thought. This frog used to hop, it used to live. It had a life, yet here it was on the table. Dead and out of this world, yet somehow still in it. "I want to live," I thought. How many times had someone pleaded? How many times could I have let them go? My hands hung lamely by my sides. My pen fell out of my fingers, onto the table, and rolled onto the floor. "Lena," Tony said. I just stared at the frog's cloudy, unmoving eyes. For this one unexplainable moment, I was this frog. I had been dead and lifeless for so long, and here I was, enchanted and brought back to life. Did we not have moments of grace? I whispered. "What?" Tony asked. I continued to stare at the frog's lifeless body. My heart beat and my eyes blinked. The frog moved out of focus, and Tony's face came to the forefront of my mind. I could taste food dribbling down my throat, see Tony digging into scoops of his ice cream, an orange flower on Justin's tongue, the rain, the glorious rain. "I want to live," I said, refocusing on the frog. I pulled out the pins, one by one, from the frog's tiny, webbed feet. Then, I pushed back in my chair and cradled its cold body in my left palm. I approached the windows that lined the side of the anatomy classroom. I unclasped them and pushed out. As though holding shards of glass, I held its limp body, close to me, keeping my arm near my ribs. I leaned out the window and reached down. Underneath a rosebush, a flower that symbolizes love, I lay the small frog on rose petals. I covered it with a few mounds of dirt, making sure its body was mixed with the earth and the rose petals. In Latin, I said, "Ignos mei, forgive me." I turned to face the class. Without a word, I gathered my books and bag and left. Chapter 17. I sat on the Madame Curie statue's basin and looked out at Wickham campus, but my eyes quickly lost focus. Even though I was staring at thousands of blades of grass, in my mind I saw the rigid sculpting of Viken's biceps as he wielded his sword. I shook my head and looked back at the individual blades of grass fluttering in the wind. That soon lost my interest, and another image from my past came to the forefront of my thoughts: Rhodes' eyes. He blinked so that his long lashes barely grazed the top of his cheeks. The image burned me and I gasped for air. I sighed, shook my head, and focused back on the campus. I could see the splits in the wood of the trees across the pathway. My breath felt heavy when I inhaled and then exhaled. Would I cry? I kept waiting for it to happen, but it hadn't happened, not yet, anyway. I tried to concentrate on anything that would have been difficult to see with the human eye. If I was still seeing with my vampire sight, maybe I hadn't fully acclimated. For the first time, I wished it was gone. I continued to watch the wind rustle the leaves. Students walked by, carrying books and backpacks. Teachers and groundskeepers passed me, too. I watched them all, anything and anyone to distract myself from the event that just happened in the anatomy classroom. Then someone sat down on my right. You can rip a cat open with your bare hands, but you couldn't cut the frog. Justin asked gently. I couldn't cut the frog, I admitted. I turned my head to look at him. I kept my hands clasped between my knees. He took my hand into his, and we sat in silence for a moment. Justin rubbed the top of my hand with his thumb. This sent a comfort through me. Justin had a way of making me feel as though everything, no matter what it was, would be all right. That anything could be fixed, even the ghosts of my past and all the ways I tried to escape my pain. Justin, I could feel. I gripped tighter onto his hand. Justin, I could feel with my whole body. We sat like that for a few moments and soon everyone in our anatomy class filed past. Tony included. He stopped next to the basin. Len, Tony started to say. His eyes darted to Justin's hand intertwined with mine. He looked forward, and embarrassment passed over his features. He looked down at us again and then stalked away toward Hopper. I have to go in a minute, I said with a sigh and stood up. I have an appointment. For what? Family obligations, I explained, kind of nudging my feet into the dirt. I glanced back at Tony, but he was almost halfway across the meadow. You said you wanted to ask me something. 2 weeks from now is Halloween, Justin said. It's a really big deal in my family because there's a football game at the local high school and my dad's the coach. I mean, he's a lawyer, but he's a coach, too. This game is a huge deal to him. Anyway. He sighed. I'm going home for the game and I really want you to come. Parents. Justin's parents. In my mind was a gold earring in a palm in the rain. I tried to ignore the image in my head. Your house? I asked, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. For Halloween? Yeah, the 31st. It's only an hour or so away. There was silence for a moment as Justin's words flowed through my mind. Yeah, the 31st. I placed my palm on my head and ran it over my hair. Heat suddenly swirled in my cheeks and I found it very hard to breathe smoothly. So do you? Justin asked. Want to come? It's October, I thought. My breath came through my nose in short wisps. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my chest. Oh, Justin grumbled, and then swallowed. You don't have to come. Justin must have been reacting to my silence. There was a fade in his eyes. He was still sitting on the basin, even though I had stood up and slung my bag over my shoulder. No. I want to, I said, though my voice was breathy. I started to back away from him down the path. Look, I have to go. I'll come by your room after my library shift, I said. Around 6. Lena, wait. I turned from him and ran up the path toward Main Street. The truth was that I wasn't running away from Justin asking me to go to his parents' house. I was running from the date, the ticking clock in my head that I had let fall silent. Justin's invitation had set it back in motion because it was October and Nuit Rouge had begun. I couldn't remember the last time I had been so distracted. Nuit Rouge had started and I hadn't even realized it. I walked slowly down Main Street, taking in the sights of the town I had now grown to love. I shoved my hands deep into my pockets as I passed by the marina and into the more residential part of Lover's Bay. It was surprisingly easy to let my guard down. Justin, Enos, Tony, and all that Wickham offered distracted my thoughts every moment of every day. I knew that as the days of Nuit Rouge passed, I had to dive deeper into my human existence and leave the vampire world behind. Just as Rode had said, my life depended on it. I stepped through the cast iron archway of the Lover's Bay Cemetery. As I followed the signs to the main office, I knew in my gut that I was doing the right thing. Once I stepped inside, I noticed it was very white. Floral paintings on the wall gave the room a light pink glow. A woman stood up from behind a white antique desk. She was young, early 30s, with a facial expression that set her mouth pointed down. "Can I help you?" she asked in a soothing tone. "Yes, I would like to erect a tombstone," I said. "In memoriam," I added, suddenly remembering Rhodes' remains were hanging around my neck. "Do you have a tombstone ready?" "No," I replied. "Not exactly." The woman opened a brochure that she slid out from a stack on the right side of her desk. "You can call this number here. They're local monument dealers. They can help you design a tombstone." I took out an envelope filled with $100 bills. As Rhodes said, I was to deal exclusively in cash. And let's face it, I had more than enough. The woman's eyes darted to the money and then to my face. "How much is a plot, generally?" I asked. The woman looked me up and down and then sighed. "How old are you?" she asked, looking at me with a raised eyebrow. 16, I said. "I really can't do this without a parent's consent," she said with an edge of power in her voice. "I hated humans like this. This tombstone is for my parents, both of whom are dead. So if you want a couple $1,000 for your cemetery, then you'll allow me to put it up. If not, I'll go somewhere else." "Oh," was all she said with a bow of her head so I couldn't see her embarrassed eyes. She pulled out a sheet of paper for the plot purchase. My mistake. She charged me $2,000 so Rhodes' tombstone would rest under the branches of a sturdy oak tree. Even then, even while understanding the certainty of his death, I couldn't fathom that road had ever been weak enough to die from the sun. That next week, Justin and I walked toward the lacrosse field on a Friday afternoon. "I'm glad you're coming home with me for Halloween," he said, his hand wrapped in mine. Justin carried his lacrosse gear over his other shoulder. "You haven't changed your mind in a week, right?" "I'm excited to meet your family," I said. Justin brought my hand up to his lips and kissed my knuckles. Coming toward us, across the meadow, was Tracy and a group of commuter kids. Just as we passed her, one of them, a tall girl with black hair and dark-framed glasses, pretended to cough under her breath. I ignored it. Tracy glanced back at us and she narrowed her eyes at me, tossing her hair over her shoulder. The week after Justin asked me to go home to meet his family, I wrote a paper for anatomy class. I had to write about the entire dissection process of the frog. Miss Tate said she understood what had happened in class. She would never understand, but I digress, and I was to write a paper instead. For a week straight, I only saw Tony during anatomy class. He wasn't home when I knocked for breakfast or lunch. His roommate always said he just wasn't home. Tony didn't answer his phone, either. How was it possible to avoid me so successfully? The art tower seemed a sacred place to Tony, and I wasn't going to poke my nose around there when he was obviously avoiding me. Another week passed, and on that next Friday it was warmer than it had been. All I needed was a light sweater and jeans. "My mom is cooking up this whole big meal in your honor," Justin said. We were back on the path and almost at the lacrosse field. It was about 3 in the afternoon. "Your mother?" I gulped, feeling a stab of anxiety in my chest. I usually avoided the thought of my mother's eyes or how she smelled like wax candles and apples. Yet, she keeps asking what you like to eat. "And you eat a lot for someone so thin." So I told her to make my favorite, pot roast. I wondered for a moment what Justin's mother would look like. He kissed me on the cheek just as we got to the edge of the lacrosse field. "We're gonna leave at, like, 5:30 or so, does that sound okay?" "Perfect," I said, and sat down. Once I did, Claudia and Kate plopped down on either side of me. This wasn't a surprise. They had been doing that all week. That is, sitting down next to me when Justin was around and then virtually ignoring me when Tracy was with them. It must have been exhausting. "Lena. Look what we got," Claudia said. Her eyes were wide with excitement. Around Kate's and Claudia's necks were 2 tiny vials of pixie dust, the kind you can buy in a child's store. "We tried to find some that looked like daggers, like yours. But we couldn't," Kate added. "Yet, we thought we should try to coordinate," Claudia said. "Your style is definitely unique." "Coordinate?" I asked, and rolled up my sleeves as the boys on the lacrosse team started to whiz up and down the field passing the ball back and forth from one another's nets. I lifted my chin toward the sky. Claudia looked up at the sky, too. She didn't know it, but I was checking the time from the position of the sun. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Claudia said, stupidly assuming I was thinking about the weather. "Wait until the team moves indoor for the winter." I had on sunglasses as we lay in the field. "It is so stinky in there," Kate said. "And, like, every girl comes to see the guys play. Losers." "Lena. Look, Justin said, drawing my attention to the field and pointing at Kittis's bright pink knee pads. I shared the laugh with him before the coach yelled for Justin to stop flirting with his girlfriend. So, Lena, you and Justin. Claudia was leading. She smiled in a way that I realized she meant me to understand something that she was not saying aloud. What? I asked, confused. You just came from Seeker. Together. Did you two? Did we what? I asked, lowering my chin to look at her over my lenses. Didn't he come from your dorm room? Claudia asked. I shook my head. He's never been in my room. What? Kate cried, sitting up. He's never been in your room. I shook my head again. I watched the field. Justin ran toward the goal, cradling the ball in his net. When he got the goal in, Kate and Claudia sat up. We screamed in joy. We weren't losers. I was popular now. People watched me and Justin walk by wherever we went. But could I show him my room? The things in my life that made me, well, me? Though, Kate was right. Justin would start asking about the room eventually. Claudia leaned back on her hands to enjoy the sun. She casually looked left in the direction of Hopper. Ew, she said unexpectedly. Kate and I both looked at her. She was peering up at the art tower. Stare much? Claudia said. I twisted my body to look. I saw two almond eyes looking down at the lacrosse field from the art tower. Once I met Tony's gaze, he turned into the darkness of the room behind him. He's been watching you all week. Assembly, class, now here, Kate said. I didn't notice, I said, and stood up. I'll be right back, I said. I peeked at the lacrosse field again. Justin was about to run a play with the team. You shouldn't even bother, Lena. It's leading him on, Kate called after me and pushed up the sleeves of the black sweater she was wearing. I'll be right back, I said again, and peeked up at the art tower window. It was now empty. I didn't know Tony had been watching me all week, though I wished I had known. Perhaps I could have told him that the three-piece were spending time with me and not the other way around. It was Justin I cared about, anyway, and I certainly wasn't a member of their group. I walked across the meadow, into Hopper, and up the winding metal stairs of the art tower. Hello. I called while climbing up. There was no response. Tony, I know you despise me now, but you shouldn't stare and you shouldn't blow me off. Still no response, so I continued up the stairs. You can come to my room, you know, I gasped when I stepped into the doorway. Across the room, in the direct eye line of the door, was the painting. I stopped where I was walking. I didn't know what to think or say. Tony had finally done it. My portrait. The perspective was from behind, from the middle of my back and up. My head was turned to the right, to show my profile, and I was laughing, open-mouthed and happy. The sky in the painting was blue, and my tattoo was etched on my left shoulder. Not in a horrid way but in an artistic way. I knew the painting was taken from a photo, I had seen it in Justin's locker in Hopper just 2 stories down from where I stood. It was from the day we bungee jumped. Unlike the photo, where I was wearing a t-shirt, in the painting, my back was naked, exposing my shoulders. I could see the deep curve of my spine and the smooth slopes of my shoulders. Tony hadn't just been practicing his art, he had been studying my body, my soul. "You like it?" Tony asked. "It's beautiful," I whispered. I couldn't take my eyes away from the painting. How on earth could anyone see me this way? As though I were someone to admire because of her happiness. "That's not me." "It can't be," I said. "That's how I see you." "Smiling? Happy?" I asked, turning my head to the right to Tony. He was standing next to me. "You make me happy." I looked back at the painting, unable to look away from the radiance of my smiling profile. "Lena." Tony reached out and took hold of my right hand. His brown eyes looked into mine and his thin mouth was in a straight line, not smiling, not laughing, just being still. Usually his smile would lighten my mood, something funny was always bound to come out. Tony's hands cupped my own and I saw that his fingers were not covered in paint. His baseball hat was backward and his button-down shirt was spotless. He must have finished the painting days ago. "I want to tell you before it's too late," he said. I looked at our hands, a sudden thought, realizing. "Don't," I tried to say. "I don't, Tony. Please. I love you." He said it quickly, like pulling a band-aid off. He checked my gaze for approval. There was a silence that followed, and I could tell from the way he looked at me that he wanted me to say something. "Tony," I started to say, but he jumped right in. "I've loved you for, ever, so there's no use in, convincing me it's not true. And I know that you think we're friends, and we are, even though you've been hanging out with that IT. But I want more. And I think you could, too. Maybe not right now, but I'm going to meet Justin's parents tonight." Tony let go of my hands and backed away. He took his baseball hat off and ran a hand through his spiky black hair. "Oh, that's cool. It's no big deal." "Tony, wait," I reached my hands out. He was almost at the stairs. "Yeah. I gotta go." "Don't go." "The painting. It's beautiful." He turned and walked down the stairs with a quick pace to his step that alerted me that I was in no way supposed to follow. Chapter 18. Justin's family lived in, get this, Rhode Island. A small state between Massachusetts and Connecticut. I didn't know what to expect for the weekend, so I brought way more clothes than I needed. When Justin pulled in front of Seeker, the sight of my suitcase was met with a brilliant smile. "Do you really need all of this?" He opened the back hatch of the car. "You okay?" he asked, noticing that I wasn't smiling as I normally did. He leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "I had a fight with Tony." "About what? More portrait stuff? Is he ever going to finish it?" "No idea," I said. It wasn't my place to tell Justin that Tony had finished his portrait. "You'll talk after the weekend," Justin said. "He just needs to calm down." Curtis turned from the back seat. "Hey, lady." That's what he'd been calling me lately. Then a hand smaller and thinner than Justin's stuck up from the final seat row. He waved for an instant, and I realized Roy was lying down on his back. I got into the passenger seat, and we were off. I rolled down the window as Lovers Bay's main street became the entrance to Route 6, then Route 6 became the highway. We sped faster than any horse I'd ever owned, and the trees seemed like a blur of evergreen. I put the window down completely and I let the pressure of the wind push my hand back. Justin looked over at me, smiled, and squeezed my knee. I smiled back and lifted my chin to the dwindling sunlight. Twilight lay over a long street flanked by oak trees with orange-tipped leaves. The houses had spacious lawns with pumpkins placed on white-painted porches. Some were carved with jagged smiles, lit candles inside their mouths. Guess Halloween isn't real popular in England, hey? Curtis asked, pulling a light jacket over his t-shirt. We were headed up a sloped driveway toward a grey colonial mansion. You're looking at everything with your mouth open. Justin's house was 3 stories, with a light blue front door and pumpkins lining a stone pathway. We get tons of trick-or-treaters, he said as he hauled both my suitcase and his bag up toward the front door. Justin opened it up, letting me inside first, followed by Curtis and Roy. "Mom!" Justin yelled. The front foyer was huge, filled with landscape paintings and mahogany furniture. Portraits and paintings lined the walls. Justin's voice echoed in the high ceilings and over the shiny wood floor. "We're here!" Curtis yelled, and snuck past me. He headed to the right into a cushy living area. He plopped all of his bags onto the floor and clicked on the television. Roy did the same and found a spot at the other end of a long, leather couch. I, on the other hand, had never seen a modern house before. It was filled with electronics, some of which I had seen at Wickham, and plenty of modern artwork. The living room was just off the side of the main foyer. A grand staircase led up to the second-floor landing. A woman in her mid to late 50s with fabulous blonde hair and laugh wrinkles came running down the staircase. "Ah! You're here," she said. Her sandals made a clacking on the wooden steps as she raced toward us. "Hey, Mom," Justin said, and placed his bag down by the front door. His mother, Mrs. Enos, grabbed Justin into an embrace. Her hair fell about her face like feathers. She kissed his forehead and cheeks. "I don't see you enough," she said, squeezing his cheeks and kissing him again. Then she stepped back and looked at me. "Wow," she said, looking me up and down. "You are one beautiful girl," she said to me and grabbed me into her arms. I hugged her in return and felt her palms press into my back. "You weren't lying," she said to Justin when she pulled away from me and walked into the living room. Curtis and Roy got up from the couch and hugged their mother. "Lena, I want to hear everything, I mean everything, about England. Tell me all about you," she said when she turned from Curtis and Roy. "Come watch me get the salad ready for dinner." Justin and I shared a glance, and as I followed his mother into the kitchen, I fielded the questions with grace and told her only as much as she needed to know. After dinner, I came out of the bathroom freshly showered in jeans and a t-shirt. I held my bag of toiletries in my hand and was making my way down the darkened hall toward the guest bedroom. I took a step, then hesitated. There was a shuffling behind me, but it stopped the same time I did. I spun around. Justin stood in the darkness. Every human skin is different. I know this from the thousands of times I sunk my teeth into someone's neck. Easy. Like a knife sliced through apple skin. But there in the dark, Justin's skin glowed. He walked toward me very slowly. I watched the way the V-shape of his lower stomach muscles moved under his skin. He had no shirt on and a pair of jeans that hardly hung on to the sides of his hips. I looked up and instead stared at the sculpted definition of his arms. He grabbed my hand and in an instant the door was closed and I was on my back on the bed. I was fully clothed, but I wished I wasn't. Justin's hands were all over me. First they held my arms over my head so he could kiss my neck. Then he let me grasp him back and I held him close to me, wrapping my legs around his waist. He was groaning in my ear, almost a growl like he was going to devour me. I placed my lips right under his jawbone and licked him so I could taste the salt of his skin on my tongue. His palms ran up my thighs, his fingers fumbling to unbutton my jeans when "Justin," his mother called from the base of the stairs. "You have to walk around the neighborhood," Mrs. Enos said to me as she took a sheet of cookies out of the oven. Justin and I shared a devious smile as we walked into the kitchen. I took a cookie that was offered to me and decided in that moment that chocolate chip cookies were the most amazing smell ever. There are literally hundreds of kids in this neighborhood and every house decorates for the holiday. "It's true," Justin said. His cheeks were still red from our tryst in the guest bedroom. Justin's mother ruffled his hair and stole a smile at me as she walked out of the kitchen. The casual familiarity between them jolted a memory. The mornings in my father's house smelled like fresh tilled earth and summer grass. As I rested my head on my pillow dreaming away, my father would whisper, "Lena," rousing me from sleep. We would walk through the orchards, discussing this and that, spending as much time together as we could before the day turned to work. Justin's mother, her one look said it all. I had forgotten what it meant to be a daughter. I had been queen for so long. I could almost taste the apples in my father's orchard, feel the explosion of tart sweetness on my tongue, when Justin's fingers gently grasped mine. The soft touch disrupted my thoughts and the images from my home blew away as all memories do, like smoke. We walked out of the house. We strolled down the sloped driveway and then headed down the street. It was almost 7 o'clock, so children dressed in costume ran from house to house up and down the long street. "Do you ever dress up?" I asked him. "I did when I was little," he said. "So why did you take me here?" "To your family?" I asked, smiling at a little girl. The street was about a half-mile long and brimming with children in costumes. I looked at the many lights from front porches and the children running from house to house. "Because I think you're going to be part of my life for a long time," Justin said. I wished we were back in the guest bedroom. We walked some more, hand in hand, munching on the cookies his mother had sent with us. "I don't know much about your family," Justin said. "You never talk about them." A little boy with white fangs in his mouth ran by us toward a house nearby. I couldn't help but stare. "They died a long time ago." "But you said you had a brother." "That day in the rain." "I did. But he also died," I said, continuing to look forward. I could feel Justin's gaze on me. "Anyone that I could call family has died in some form or another." Justin's cheeks reddened and his hands dropped from mine. "Don't pity me," I said quietly. "I don't," he said, showing me his palms in protest. Justin frowned, and his eyes were hesitant to meet mine. "I just think," I don't know. I don't know what I think. Everyone you love is dead. That must be lonely. It is. But it's not something that defines me. I don't let it. There was a pause. I listened to the children around us and the rustle of candy in pillow sacks. I'm not lonely now, I said, taking his hand back into mine. Justin nodded, but it was an unsatisfied nod. Look, I said. Now it was my turn to stop walking. This isn't something you can fix. I want to. I know. And if there was some way that it would be possible, I know you are the only person who could do it. Justin gripped my hand tightly. We walked, and when we ran out of cookies we headed back. The night had ended in a calm silence. Justin's father came home, and we said hello, then good night, because it was late and I wanted to lay my head down. Justin's shoulder would have been ideal, but his family was always around. After I trudged up the stairs, full of cookies and Halloween candy, I closed the door to the guest bedroom and fell back on the bed. I thought about how I was accepted so easily into Justin's family. The memories of my own family were so faded and so difficult to access that they were just vague impressions now. Family wasn't something I had to create, I was admitted, warmly. As I took my clothes off, Justin's mouth and green eyes seeped in and out of my thoughts. When my head hit the pillow, I thought back on what he'd said in the street, that if he could, he would fix my pain. No one could take back all of the horrendous things I had done. No one but me. But Justin Enos was a part of me now, and that eased the grief still hiding in my heart. Somewhere, almost near sleep, I imagined Justin, in his room, on his back, thinking about me, hoping that I was up and awake, thinking of him, too. Chapter 19. That next morning, I could feel the chill in the air even in the bundles of blankets on the guest bed. I turned over on my stomach and lifted myself onto my knees. There was a small window behind the head of the bed, and I lifted the curtains with the tips of my fingers. The sky was the color of baby's breath, so I knew it was too early for the Enos family to be up and debating breakfast. I decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood alone. I pulled on my jeans, didn't bother to brush my hair, and wore one of Justin's Wickham sweatshirts. I walked down the driveway and stepped onto the street. The sky was now a blue-gray, and a thin mist hung over the trees. Justin's sweatshirt smelled like him. Sweet and woody, a comforting smell now. I glanced back at Justin's house once I had walked a few feet down the street. I wasn't planning to walk very far, just enough to explore the neighborhood while his family was still sleeping. My stomach did that lurching thing and I thought about eggs and coffee, something that I was sure Justin's mother would make. I smiled. Rhode Island. Of course I had to be in Rhode Island. These days all I wanted was to stop thinking about Rhode and my vampire life. And I had, in some respect. My ESP was gone, my vampire sight had started to wane, and I wanted more than ever to move forward and be the human I was always meant to be and perhaps was finally becoming. Without my ESP, I was able to forget how separate I once was and participate in my life without knowing everyone's emotional intentions. Just when a glimmer of a smile spread across my face, something moved behind me. There it was, the inherent feeling that I was being watched. No, let me make the distinction clear, the feeling that I was being followed. There is a sweeping realization when a vampire is present around another vampire. A hush of silence, like going deaf, and the sudden feeling of being covered in icicles. The hair on my arms rose, and I found it difficult to swallow. I spun around. There, in the middle of suburbia, underneath a street lamp, stood Solian. I gasped. The air whooshed into my lungs. I held it, and then there was silence. He was so still, unmoving. Solian wore a white tunic, white pants, and gold leather sandals. A white turban covered his hair. He had a round face, and though his cheeks were full, he did not nor could he ever look nubile. He almost seemed like a ghost in that morning light. He was so holy, so untouched by everyday worry, that he didn't have a wrinkle on his face. This is a man who existed before Christ's birth. How Solian knew I was in Rhode Island, I would never know, but there he stood. Instantly I felt safe, protected, as though a great white light circled us on that quiet street. Solian is known in the vampire world for transcending evil, for living a life without the need to feed off humans. Only the weak, Rode once told me of Solian's life. He only drinks the blood of the reprehensible. Solian walked toward me, both of us silent, and he cupped my right cheek with his hand. He had no smell, and his touch was perfectly lukewarm. His dark brown eyes gazed warmly into mine, and he smiled. "I am pleased with your transformation," he said. His voice was slow, like molasses. From his pocket he pulled out a single flower, thyme. Little, purple flowers smaller than the tip of a finger attached to a long, green stem. Thyme is used in rituals meant for the regeneration of the soul. I gently took it with my thumb and index finger. To what on this good earth am I allowed this honor? I asked, stunned. Even in the highest days of my ranking as queen of a coven, Solian never visited me. He took a step back so there were a couple of feet between us. "I come with a warning," he said in his languid tone. I slapped my hand over my mouth. My heart pounded with such a force that Solian looked at my chest because he could hear it. Nut Rouge. My God! I completely forgot, I said. Last night was the final night of Nut Rouge. Today is November 1st. Nut Rouge has ended, I said, and looked to the ground, to the trees, to the sleeping houses that I wished I was in, and then back at Solian. Vicken has discovered I am not hibernating. Solian nodded once slowly in response. I looked back toward Justin's parents' house in the distance. It was still dark. As a unit your coven is unstoppable. Separate as they are now, they will not succeed. Solian paused. The hunt for you has begun. It was back. My vampire extrasensory perception was overtaking my human conscience. I assumed it was because of my close proximity to Solian's power. An image, not from my own mind but from Solian's, came to the forefront of my sight, Rhodes' fireplace in my home in Hathersage. There is something else, I whispered, looking at the fireplace in my mind. A waver in my tone gave away my fear. Something else you came to tell me. They have found a clue in the embers. Rode burned all his evidence of your transformation -1. One word left on a charred and blackened piece of paper. Wickham, I said. I saw the image in my head. A tiny jagged piece of paper from the school's brochure. The ESP connection with Solian was extremely strong. I could feel Solien's compassion, which surprised me as I believed all these years that he cared nothing for trivial matters such as these. I felt my human and vampire connection to the event, and somewhere through the images from Solien I could almost feel Viken's rage. I had to catch my breath, but I couldn't. I bent over and placed my hands on my thighs. Solien cocked his head to the side to watch me. My reaction must have been interesting. So I said between breaths. I stood back upright, holding a hand over my chest. They're coming for me. They will come to reclaim their maker. They do not know you are human, Lena. That will be a surprise. Solien's gentle eyes smiled, though his face remained stoic. His eyes traveled to the vial of dust on my neck. In a flicker of an instant, I thought I saw sadness in Solien's eyes. He took a step forward and reached for the vial. He gently held the pendant in his hands. They have to figure out which Wickham and where, right? I asked. Solien let go of the vial and cupped his hand on my cheek again. He did not say anything in response. I knew as well as he did that it was only a matter of time before they found me. I was trying to rationalize. You were Rhodes' brightest day, he whispered. There was a stab in my chest when Solien said Rhodes' name aloud in the quiet street. Close your eyes, he whispered next to my ear, and I did. After a moment he said, Go forth, Lena, in darkness and in light. When I opened my eyes, the street was empty and Solien was gone. After a couple of days, the Halloween decorations came down and were replaced by the most ridiculous decorations I had ever seen. Shops on Lovers Bay's main street were covered in turkeys. Pumpkins were still all the rage, but there were also cardboard cutouts of tall ships, strangely dressed people in high, black boots and top hats, and, of course, more turkeys. Thanksgiving, Justin explained. We were walking through campus on our way to the library to study for the math SAT. Justin went into a long explanation of his family's Thanksgiving. I listened, though my mind was running in circles as it had been ever since Solien disappeared on Justin's street. Truth be told, I wanted to believe that Solien's visit was some kind of apparition. That I had made it up. Despite Justin's attempt to study for the SAT, he couldn't distract me anymore. All I could see and think about was Solien's warning. I carried the time with me everywhere, always in my pocket. Look. The square root of 81 is 9, right? Justin asked. We were walking up toward the library to work in one of the private study rooms. Justin had gotten to enjoying those rooms because he could pull the shades and kiss me for a half hour instead of working on square roots. But I don't understand why we need to be able to answer these questions and then be tricked with other possible answers, I replied. That's why these tests are evil. We have to take them. Justin could have been talking about anything, and as he kept talking, I was back on his parents' street in Rhode Island. Solien was cupping my face and I was imagining Viken researching every possible explanation for Wickham that he could. I had let my new life distract me for too long. I was so foolish. You just concentrate on the problem and then look to the answers. Justin was still explaining the best way to take the test as we walked up the pathway and toward the library. I watched his mouth move, the way his hard, structured jaw was oddly juxtaposed to his pouted mouth. His profile was relaxed, and his hair had grown out a bit, so the clean-cut sports boy was just a little bit messy. It was time to tell him the truth. "Let's go to my room," I said, pushing the door to the library closed. Justin had one hand on the door handle to pull it open. "To study," I clarified. Justin turned his head to look at me. "Your room." His eyes were a mix of shock and utter excitement. "Not like that," I said, and pulled him out of the doorway of the library so the students behind us could walk inside. "I thought you didn't want anyone to see your room. Privacy, or whatever you said." "Come on," I said, and led Justin back on the path toward Seeker. I wasn't exactly sure what to say or how I was going to say it, but it was time he knew what I had been hiding. We climbed up the stairs toward my apartment. "Hold on," Justin said, and stopped in the middle of the stairwell. "Is this why you haven't shown me your place?" He put out his hands as a gesture of disbelief. It was darker in the stairwell than it had been outside. The hotel-like lamps with their blue shades highlighted the stairs and his light green sweater with a golden glow. "Because you live in Professor Bennett's old apartment?" I knew that already. "It scared everyone else," I said, and continued up. The rosemary and lavender were still tacked to their usual spots. I could smell both of them as I unlocked the door and walked inside. Justin walked into the apartment behind me. "This is amazing," he said. "You know, despite being a dead guy's place." I decided to give Justin time to take in the decorations of my small apartment, so I walked toward the balcony door. I pushed aside the curtain and looked outside. I watched the swaying trees with their falling leaves and some of the scattered and smashed pumpkins that were left over from Halloween celebrations. "Whoa," I heard, and assumed Justin saw Rhodes' sword. I turned and found that I was right. Justin stood a foot away from the distinguished metal. I walked back in and stood on his right side. "Is that real?" Justin's voice was filled with awe and his eyes danced up and down the sword. Then he glanced at the iron wall sconces. They were made to look like roses and wire, bound together in a small circle. "I need to talk to you," I said, and took hold of Justin's warm fingers. "I've never known a girl who was into weapons," Justin said as he continued to look at the sword. He wasn't paying attention to me. "Okay," I said. "We need to talk." "Is this about Tony?" Justin said, and finally turned to me. "Tony? The fact that you guys aren't talking. I noticed." "Everyone's noticed." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not what this is about. Or why you haven't shown me your room before. I didn't want to press it because it seemed so important to you to, like, keep it a secret." "Secret?" I asked. "Yeah. Tracy kept saying how you're a millionaire or your family's royalty or something." I shook my head again and put my hands out so my palms faced Justin. "I want you to look around this living room. I mean really look. And tell me what you see." I did look. "Kinda goth, but that makes sense. You always wear black." Justin smiled, but the mischievous tone in his voice made me realize how little he actually understood about my true nature. "Come on, are you royalty?" he asked, just compounding his ignorance. "Please? Really look." Justin sighed and turned away from the sword. He spun slowly and looked at the adornments of the room. My bedroom was behind him, and the door was wide open. A black comforter and simple wooden night table were in direct view. Then he turned toward the doorway and caught sight of the coffee table holding my sunglasses and car keys. He walked across the room and stopped at the bureau. "You have a thing for old photography." He bent over and picked up the photo of Rode and me. "Hey," he said. "I've seen that guy before." Silence. "What?" I whispered, not believing what I was hearing. "A few days before school started. He was walking around campus." "How do you know him?" "Old boyfriend." "No." "Well, sort of," I said, unable to hide my disappointment that Justin hadn't seen Rode recently. Somehow, I still hadn't given up a sliver of hope. "Sort of. He's dead." "Just keep looking, please," I said. He placed the photo down and started investigating the others. There were a couple of me alone, posing here and there around England. Then he picked up the one of the coven, the only one that existed. I wore a brilliant green gown, though the photo was black and white. Gavin and Heath stood on my right, Vicken and Song on my left. While Justin was examining the photo, I focused on Vicken's face. His arm hung around my waist. It was just sunset, so the sky behind us was light grey and the castle decorated the back of the frame like a monster made of stone. I couldn't stop staring at Vicken's eyes. The strong cheekbones, the eyes that trusted me the night I took him in Scotland. Now, in my absence, he was preparing to scour the earth to find me. "How did you get this photo taken?" "It's not even a photo, it's weird. It's called a daguerreotype. Earlier in history, pictures were made on glass plates. Around the turn of the century. They're all so real. I went for it, that's because they are." Justin turned to look at me. "Where did you find someone to take them? You look like a superhuman or something." "Is that your family?" he asked, pointing at the coven. "Those men are the closest thing I have to family. That's my house in Hathersage." Justin examined the photo again. "Why not just take the picture with a real camera? They didn't exist back then." Justin's expression was incredulous. "Exist," he said. "Photography was invented, like, 100 years ago. This was going to be harder than I thought." "Those photos are from 100 years ago," I said gravely. "That's not possible," Justin replied. I stepped to the center of the room, breathing in and out, as steadily as I could. I pointed. "Look about you. Black curtains. Vintage decorations. Photos of me from 100 years ago. Gothic art and portraits of me in my bedroom that are dated from the 1700s. Why aren't you asking me what I think is going through your mind? What is there to ask? I don't know what's going on." Justin was starting to panic. In the past I would have been enthralled to make him feel such fear. Now, I just wanted to get to the point. Think. When we went snorkeling, why hadn't I ever seen the light reflect on the ocean? Justin swallowed so hard that I could see the muscles next to his ear clench. "I don't know. You're sick? You have that weird disease where you can't go out in the sun. Is it so easy to make excuses for me?" I asked. "Jesus, Lena. What are you saying?" Justin's naturally green eyes darkened. "Those men," I said, getting close to him. Those men standing on either side of me and the man you saw before school started. Those men are vampires. Justin looked at the photos and then back at me. No, he said. A general reaction, a common reaction. In fact, every human I ever told and then subsequently murdered had had the same exact reaction. Up until 8 weeks ago I was a vampire. One of the oldest of my kind. Those men there are my coven. Justin placed a hand on top of the couch as though he needed it to support his weight. Do you think I'm a freak? That I would believe, Justin started to say. This is the truth, I said. You know me. You know I wouldn't lie. I thought I did, but I guess I don't know anything because right now I'm supposed to believe that you were a vampire. A blood-sucking, immortal vampire. That you killed people. Did you kill people? His tone was sarcastic, even a little mean. I swallowed. Thousands. I was the most powerful female of my kind. If you were to meet me as a vampire, I would not be myself as I am to you now. I would be ruthless. I would have used whatever tactics and means I had to hurt you. I was painfully sad about the life I lost. I gestured to the photo, believed that the closer a vampire felt to her life before she died, the more evil she would be as a vampire. And I was horrible. Those men in my coven were specifically chosen. Boys, just like you. I picked them for their strength, speed, and ambition. You found them? To, join you. His sarcasm was painful. I wouldn't say found. What would you say? I made them into vampires. This is crazy. Justin was yelling now. Why are you lying about this? I stalked over to the kitchen and took the tins out, opening the tops and showing him dried dandelion heads and the white petals of chamomile flowers sitting in the bottom of the tiny circular tins. How do you think I know so much about herbs? Or why I'm obsessed with medicinal healing? That I knew you could place that flower on your tongue and eat it. I don't know, Justin said, and took a step back. Or why I have a real sword on my wall. I sighed and let my gaze fall from Justin's. He wanted to lace me into this perfect, innocent idea. Lena, from England. Lena, who couldn't drive. Lena, who was falling for a boy who took her to unusual places so she could feel alive. I stalked over to the bureau and took the urn. I opened it, and a few pieces of glittering dust flew in the air. This is an urn filled with dust. The remains of a dead vampire. Why do I have this if I'm lying? Why are you doing this? Justin yelled. I'm trying to protect you. I yelled back, throwing my arms out. The urn fell to the floor, hitting the ground with a thud, scattering Rhodes' beautiful ashes in a pile on the floor. At the same time, my pinky finger hit the side of the sword. There was a searing zing. I screeched and fell to my knees. Pain, glorious, murderous, shocking pain. It had been 592 years since I last felt mortal pain. I turned my palm over. There was a hot, pulsating feeling. I had sliced my fingertip. The cut was tiny, but the blood oozed out. The flow was harmless, but there it was, the proof that I was human inside. Justin stood across me and came down to his knees. Together we kneeled in Rhodes' remains. I stared down at the tiny cut and did what I most desired. I brought my hand up to my lips, licked the blood, and closed my eyes. Before, it had been the taste of satisfaction, one of the only flavors in my life. I leaned my head back and sighed, relishing the wonderful duality in the moment. I hated the rust, metallic flavor, but I loved that I remembered it so well. I opened my eyes, sharing the silence with Justin. I looked at the blood, now just barely coming through, and then up at Justin's gorgeous face. "What is it?" he asked. "It tastes different," I whispered. The taste of the blood now, in this life, was just a momentary curiosity and a surge of familiarity. The relief dissipated into small waves of memories, barely making an impact on the person I was now. The vampire was gone. She had dissolved with the ritual. "Different?" Justin asked. "It tasted better before." Justin reached out for my hand, and as I snatched it away, my blood smeared on the inside of his wrist. Just a small, rust-colored line that ran from one end of the wrist to the other. Then, in that moment, as my eyes lost their focus on Justin's skin, Rhode's voice echoed in my ears. "You cannot see what you have done." Then Vicken came next. "Your features, lassie, are not of these parts." Then came my own impassioned voice, which I recognized from the day out on the peaks. "God help me, Rhode, because if you don't, I will walk out into sunlight until it scorches me to flames." Then Justin, although he was sitting in front of me, spoke to me in my head. "Everyone you love is dead. That must be lonely. How many memories can come through at once before they are just jumbled words and faces mixed together by years of pain?" The night I took Vicken, I was transfixed by his happiness. Just as I was transfixed by Justin's happiness. I refocused on his wrist and my blood smeared across his skin. There, under the smear, was his vein, a bright blue vein. "You would have been perfect," I said. I ran my thumb over and across the blood. It was still sticky. "I would have stalked you, watched you breathe with such specificity I could have timed the seconds between each inhalation. Even now, I do these things." I looked up into Justin's eyes. His gaze was fixed, his body unmoving. His large hands lay still in my grasp. "Even now, I know you cross your ankles one over the other when you're relaxed. That it gives you a feeling of power. That the vein on the right side of your wrist on your right hand snakes out and then runs deep down your arm. It takes you 2.5 seconds between each breath." "Precisely. I know all of these things and thousands more. I would have killed you with pleasure. I would have killed you and then taken you with me." I looked to the floor, but I knew that Justin had stood up. He said things like, "Got to go, talk later," and other assorted, useless comments. All I knew for sure was that the door slammed behind him. Justin left sometime in the early afternoon, but it was 4:30 when I finally looked up from the floor. I rubbed at my lower back muscles, craned my neck, and stretched my arms out. I pushed the curtain aside and walked out onto the porch. The sky was starting to head toward sunset, and I again thought of Solien's warning. "The hunt for you has begun." So I would face the coven and die alone. I was prepared for that. It was just a matter of when. I leaned against the ledge and watched so many of Wickham's students enjoying the afternoon. I hoped I would see Tony walk by and that I could call out to him, but I knew that he would be avoiding my porch. In fact, I only saw him in anatomy class. And then, he only talked about the in-class experiments. Whenever I attempted to say anything different, he would get up and go to the bathroom or make some snide comment about me being a lemming and the ringleader of the three-piece. I shook my head and refocused on the trees. Either way, I missed him. "You're leaving," I said, only these words were a memory resurfacing in my mind. I wasn't actually speaking them out loud. Hathersage, England, the days of King George II. 1740. "You are reckless," Rode hissed. He was walking away from the house and toward the endless sweeping hills. It was when I lost interest in anything but the perfect existence that I started to lose control of my mind. I became obsessed, a one-track mind. I concentrated on the perfection when the pain became too much. It was the only way I could distract myself. What did perfect mean? Blood only of humans, no animals. Only strength. "I know what I am doing," I said, bringing my feet together and raising my chin up. "Do you?" Last night Rode moved closer toward me so he was an inch away from my face. He whispered so his fangs bared at me, "You murdered a child." "A child, Lena? You always said that infant blood was the sweetest. Most pure." Rode was horror-stricken. His jaw actually dropped. He backed away from me. I said it as fact, not as an invitation. "You are not the same girl. You are not the girl on your father's vineyard in the white nightgown. I saved that child from a life of sadness. She will never have to grow old. Miss her family. Her mother. Saved her? In death? You murdered her after you let her play in this house." Rode took a breath, and from the way his eyes had a misty look, I could tell he was formulating his thoughts. "I told you to concentrate on me. That if you focus on the love you feel for me, you can break free. But you can't do that." "I see that now," Rode said. I tried to speak, but he continued before I could speak up. "They say vampires after 300 years or so begin to lose their minds. That most choose sunlight to bring them to their deaths over a slow insanity. The prospect of forever is too much. And for you the life you lost has made you insane. Living on this earth for all of eternity has brought your mind to a place where I can no longer reach you." "I'm not insane, Rode. I'm a vampire. You might try to act like it." "You make me regret what I did on that vineyard," Rode said, and turned from me, starting his long descent into the countryside. "You regret me?" I called after him, looking at his backside. "Find yourself, Lena. When you do, I will return." If I could have cried, I would have. In that instant my tear ducts filled with a scorching pain, like acid rising and collecting in the eyes. I actually bent over from the shock of the pain in my eyes when Rode disappeared into the fields. I could have watched him leave. I could have followed his frame until he was out of my vampire sight, but the pain was too much. Instead, I turned back to the house and walked into the darkened foyer. In the middle of the shadow on the tapestries and silver goblets, I decided I would never be left alone again. That's when I decided to make the coven. So I went to London and found Gavin. Chapter 20. Tap tap tap. 3 single taps on the door. I looked up from the ground. I had just finished sweeping up Rhodes' ashes back into the urn. How odd it was that all his wonderful life could be swept up in a matter of a few brush strokes. I walked to the bureau and set the photos so they stood upright. Then whoever it was knocked again. I wouldn't allow myself to think it was Justin. It wouldn't be. It would be someone looking for me, for homework, or language tutoring. For one horrendous moment I thought it would be Vicken or another member of the coven, despite the dwindling daylight. I had no idea how strong any of them were anymore. Perhaps all of them could be in the sun. I placed the urn back on the bureau and opened the door. Justin stood in the doorway with one hand in his pocket and the other on the door frame. How do I know you're not crazy? You don't. Justin walked into the apartment directly over to the photos on the bureau. Explain to me why I've been walking around campus for the last 3 hours trying to talk myself out of believing you. Explain this to me. Why do I believe you? I can't. And those men are vampires, too. He pointed at the coven. I nodded. You're not a vampire now. He crossed his arms and leaned back on the bureau. His eyes were more relaxed. There was no furrowed brow or tense lips. Instead, his eyes looked into mine for answers. Definitely not, I said as resolutely as possible. Let's say that I dare to believe you. That in some whacked-out universe this is true. Justin took a breath. How did this happen to you? Don't, vampires live forever. His words were clumsy. I could tell he was afraid of getting the information wrong. Generally, I said with a hint of laughter. I felt the tension between us break apart, and the air seemed to open up. A short wave of relief washed over my body, and my shoulders relaxed. A very ancient ritual, I said with a sigh. Ritual. A sacrifice. A ritual older than Rhodes and me combined, I said, and sat down on the couch. I kept my hands near my knees, but after a moment, Justin was sitting down next to me. Rhodes, the guy in that picture. He nodded toward the bureau. He was my best friend, I said, though my voice cracked. I cleared my throat. He died so I could be human again. I don't understand, Justin said. We looked at each other a moment, the sheer uncertainty of what lay ahead of us resting in the air. Let's just take this one thing at a time. Justin nodded, and he slipped his hand into mine. This is crazy, he whispered. Justin ran his fingertips down my skin so goosebumps erupted on my arms. I know, I replied, while relishing the glory of actually being able to feel my body. Was this joy or comfort, maybe both? I smiled at our interlocking fingers. I didn't even ask if he was mad or wanted any more explanation from me. I was just glad he was there, and not leaving me alone to rationalize the shame and confusion of my former life. We could go out tonight, Justin offered. Get our mind off this. Yeah, I said, perking up immediately. I sat up straight and smiled brightly. Come on, then. Let's go. Where are we going? I asked, standing up. My brothers are going to dinner. Then they're going out. I think we need to go out. I walked into my bedroom and strategically did not shut the door. I didn't get naked outright, but I peeked out with just a bra and underwear on. Where do you usually go? I asked. You'll see, Justin said. His mouth dropped a bit at the sight of me, and I tucked back behind the safety of the bedroom wall. Just make sure that if you decide to wear what you're wearing now, which I totally support, by the way, that you wear comfortable shoes. To my surprise and delight, we ended up in Boston. Once we got out of Justin's car, we walked as a large group up a long street flanked with grey stone buildings. Claudia and Kate walked on either side of me. It was so odd how they had started to dress just like me. And it would be a lie if I said I wasn't somewhat flattered. That night I was wearing a short black dress with black heels. The girls, once they saw what I was wearing, ran back to their dorms to put on dresses. Claudia linked her arm through mine. I hope the club's crowded tonight, she said as we walked up the street. We approached a long line of people and stopped at the very end. What club? I stepped away from the girls and asked Justin. We come here almost every Friday. We haven't lately, but mainly we go to get out of Lover's Bay. Justin motioned to a building next to us. What kind of members do they have? Justin laughed and kissed my forehead. Not that kind of club, he said. He linked his arm over my shoulder. A dance club. I guess from your time, it would have been called a ball. Oh, I said, and it suddenly made sense. Justin linked his arm around my waist and I cozied into his embrace. We were a unit, inseparable again, and he knew the truth. I was overjoyed. Happy beyond measure, and I loved to dance, even back in the 15th century, when I was human the first time. We stood in line outside the club, called Lust, and awaited admittance. Around me women and men were dressed in tight clothes. Some of the girls had on short skirts and tank tops. It was the beginning of November, and I knew they were shivering despite the unusually warm fall. This train of thought was going through my mind the moment I felt that tingling in the bottom of my stomach and the hush of silence. Yes, I was being watched. Considering Solien's warning, this was not unexpected. I leaned on Justin's warm arm around my waist, but my eyes surveyed the street. It seemed normal. Men and women walked from club to club. A street vendors sold hot dogs and pretzels. Cabs and cars drove up and down the street, and the music from the many clubs on the street filled the air with thumps and rhythms. Everything appeared normal. Let's face it. Vampires, ones of Vicken's age 200 or so, can see up to any horizon. I could have been leagues away from where he was standing. I turned to look down the street. Even though my vampire sight had mostly waned, I calculated that I was able to see 2 miles into the distance. 5 or 6 streets away, couples walked together. It smelled like cigarettes, booze, and hot dogs. I scanned the landscape, waiting for my eyes to fall on Vicken's, those brown eyes that mesmerized me and challenged my soul back in the 1800s. Perhaps it was Solien keeping an eye out? That thought brought a momentary calm to my chest. Are you ever going to tell us what your tattoo means? Claudia asked. I had taken off my coat and forgotten that on my left shoulder was the tattoo of my coven. My mom won't let me get one, she added. Oh, I began, but was saved from answering because we finally got to the door and Justin slipped something hard, like a credit card, into my hand. Just hand this over, he whispered in my ear. You have to be 21 to get in here. Oh, the irony. I looked down. My photograph was on a Massachusetts license with a fake birthday so that it said I was 21. Curtis made it, Justin added, and I handed it to a burly bouncer. The bouncer was huge, like a bodybuilder. Gavin, the last time I saw him, was bigger. I smiled in a genuine way, and the bouncer waved me into lust. Once we walked into the club, I could feel the bass of the music underneath my ribs. It pulsated inside me. Hundreds of people, no, it must have been closer to 1,000, crowded the club. Lust had 2 floors. The street level was actually the second floor of the club, though it had no dance floor and instead was a wraparound balcony. Enormous paintings decorated the walls, all depicting couples in moments of passion. I gripped the bar of the second floor railing. Justin stepped to my left. "Your jaws dropped again," Justin said, and then he looked down. His skin was highlighted green, gold, red, and black from the interchanging lights on the ceiling. "I've never seen anything like this before," I said, and then I too looked below. The people dancing looked as though they were all making love to one another. Bodies were pressed against one another so tight, I couldn't tell whose belonged to whom. Hands interlocked, legs intertwined, all in rhythm with the music blasting out of enormous speakers surrounding the club. People, in my time, never danced that way. Then the song changed. The rhythm was different from the one that had been playing before. The drums were so fast, I knew they had to be a product of technology. Music made by machines? Beat. 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 The crowd started to jump. All of the bodies on the floor jumped up and down together. Then there was a mad dash to the dance floor. Claudia, who I didn't realize was on my right, squealed with delight, "Oh, my good! I love this song!" Immediately, she got on an escalator that was in the middle of the second floor railing and rode it down to the bottom level dance floor. "Come on, Lena!" Claudia called. She smiled at me and I felt a pull in my chest. She was so eager to share this with me, but I had no idea how to move my body as the people did on the dance floor. Curtis, Roy, and Kate followed after Claudia. Actually, a lot of the people on the second floor moved toward the escalators, there was one on either end of the balcony, and down to the dance floor. Then Justin placed his hand into mine. "Let's go." I pulled away from Justin. "No way. I don't know how to dance like that." "No one here does," he said, and pulled me onto the escalator. As we rode down, I tried to explain. "The last ball I went to was before music could be played on a stereo. If you wanted to hear it, you had to go to a concert." Justin. Before I knew it, we were in the middle of the dance floor. The rhythm of the song was fast, then slow, and then fast again. The moment we got to the dance floor, it was slow again. Justin and I were surrounded by people, pressed together, everyone swaying, waiting for the moment when the song would pick up and really thud and beat everyone into a rhythm they could dance to. At that moment it was just a series of soft drum beats. "Just close your eyes," he said. "The song kinda slows down during this part and then really picks up. When it does, this place is gonna go nuts." I wrapped my arms tightly around Justin's back. I think I might have been bending my knees a bit, but compared to Justin I was basically standing still. He was amazing, pumping and thrusting his body to match the rhythm. The beat was rising, the pace of the drums was quickening, and the bodies on the dance floor moved in sync. A girl next to us kept her eyes closed while she danced and raised her arms in the air. As the rhythm picked up, so did her swaying, and she moved so dramatically, her hips and arms knocked me out of Justin's grasp. So many people were coming onto the dance floor at that point, and the bass was pumping so hard, I was pushed away from Justin before I even knew what was going on. "Lena," he called, but I was stuck in between two couples pressed between each other. I stood on my tiptoes and I could see Curtis jumping up and down, but not Justin. The music picked up, I mean so hard that it was thumping in my chest again. I was squished in the middle of the dance floor, turning this way and that. People were dancing, but I just stood. Then I heard someone whisper my name. "Let go," the voice said, though I wasn't entirely sure they were talking to me. Maybe it was all in my head. I don't know. But I took a deep breath. I smelled liquor, sweet perfumes, body odor. The last time I had been in a room with people close to this number, I was setting them on a poor helpless woman. Someone to kill. "Just let go," the voice said again. So I did. I was in the middle of the floor. I closed my eyes, let the rhythm of the song take me over, and when the song really picked up and the entire dance floor was going nuts, I was right there with them. My hands were raised above my head. I swayed. I jumped. I pressed my back against people I didn't know and felt them press back on me in return. Even though the song was pumping, my movements felt slow. I rubbed shoulders with strangers, and someone even linked hands with me. The sweat dripped down my nose and back, and I was lost in a sea of strangers. I didn't even know what I looked like anymore. I didn't even care. No bungee jump. No solitary experience. Only something like this could make me realize it. I was Lena Bodanti. No longer a vampire of the worst order. No more the leader of a coven of night wanderers. I was set free. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.